Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Moving Towards Plant-Based Milks, Are They Healthier? Where we'll pour over the facts and skim off the myths. See what I did there? I'm Greg Berry, Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. As is the case with any virtual setting, please excuse issues that may pop up. If you experience video or audio problems, click reconnect or refresh your screen to get back to the presentation right away. Before I introduce today's guest, a quick question. Which plant-based milk do you reach for first at the store? Is it almond, oat, soy, coconut, or good old-fashioned dairy? I'm going to go ahead and leave that poll up so you can make your selection. A note for today's live attendees, we are recording the webinar. Once it's been uploaded onto our website, we'll send an email to you with the replay link. Today, I'm excited to have Sharon Smalling with us. Before retiring in 2022, Sharon was a clinical dietitian for more than 4 decades. She completed her dietetic internship from the School of Health Professions at UAB in 1980. Previously, she held positions in several professional organizations and provided presentations to communities, businesses, and professional organizations. Now, before we continue, here are the results of the first poll. Which plant-based milk do you reach for first in the store? A third split almond and oat. 21% say they're still loyal to dairy. Now, as a follow-up, which slogan would make you grab a plant-based milk off the shelf? No moo, no problem. Moo-free, guilt-free. Plants got your back. Sip the future. Utterly delicious. I'm going to go ahead and keep those options up for a bit before dropping the results in the chat. Sharon, I'm so excited for you to be with us today, and I'm looking forward to learning more about plant-based milk. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
All right, terrific. I am going to turn off my video. I tend to talk with my hands, and I think that can be distracting. I also think that having a picture on the screen sometimes hides words that you might want to see. So I am going to do that very quickly, and we will get started. It looks like we've got a few people on. Thank you again so much, and I thank Greg for asking me to do this and for allowing me to choose my own topic. So we will get started talking about plant-based milks. First of all, I have no disclosures. Whenever I do a talk in which I know I'm going to be talking about brands, I like people to know no one is paying me. I am not promoting a brand. I am not trying to throw any brands under the bus. So I have no disclosures. And as he told you, I have retired. So I'm not getting any paychecks few, but not really any paychecks from any brand companies. So our objectives today is first, we're going to look at the research on dairy and its effect on health risks, because I think that is part of the reasons people tend to choose plant-based milks over dairy milks. We're going to look at the conclusions of the 2025 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee analysis. They always do an analysis prior to new guidelines coming out. They will be coming out at the end of this year. So we're going to move on to look at the nutritional differences between dairy and plant-based milks, and then just between the different varieties of plant-based milks themselves and within the brands. And then we're going to look at how to analyze a plant-based milk so that it meets your needs or an individual's needs in your family, or to help you in terms of talking with your patients or clients if this is something that you also do within your profession. So first, let's look at some of this research, and we're going to go through this quickly. This is not the whole reason for this talk, and so, but I do want to go over and help make sure you understand some of the studies that have come out concerning the reasons people might not want to choose dairy milk. So there were prospective observational studies. So remember, an observational study can only assign an association. It cannot say it it is an outcome. It is just simply an association. And what it's shown is that increasing dairy consumption does not increase the risk of developing cardiovascular disease. And it really didn't matter if it was full fat, if it was low fat, if they were looking at milk or cheese or yogurt or another type of dairy product, it still held. It did not increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. With hypertension, the DASH diet studies, which is dietary approaches to stop hypertension, these were begun in I believe it was the 1990s. And there were several iterations of the DASH diet that were studied. And in each one of them, they all had this 3 or so servings of dairy products per day. And they all showed a lowering of blood pressure. So there weren't any detrimental effects. It was actually very positive effects. And it was associated with a lower risk of hypertension altogether. With LDL cholesterol, we do know that the saturated fat in milk will raise your LDL. The randomized controlled trials, which do show cause and effect, showed the result was maybe not as statistically significant, and which is nice news. Low fat and full fat showed some variations in their trials, but I think the point to remember is that full fat things we still need to take account of in our diet. The differences in effects on LDL and risk varied. There was less of an increase with cheese or yogurt, which makes me happy. Those are my 2 favorite types of dairy. But even among individuals, if you already had a higher LDL at baseline, there was more of a negative effect. Inflammation, I think this is brought about more from social media and some books that claim dairy products promote inflammation, but there is no evidence to support this claim. With 16 intervention studies, these were done with healthy adults, and there were adults that had overweight, they had metabolic syndrome, which means they had an assortment of either hypertension, high triglycerides, a higher waist circumference, obesity, higher LDL, low HDL. They had diabetes, and there was no pro-inflammatory effect. Long-term dairy supplementation trials showed that actually there may be this weak anti-inflammatory effect, and it occurred in both of those types of populations, healthy and those with some health issues going on. So the conclusions of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the National Lipid Association were that higher fat versus lower fat dairy and within a variety of dairy products was not associated with a difference in the risk in developing cardiovascular disease. Though the evidence was graded as limited, there are more studies needed. It is well established, though, that limiting saturated fat in your diet to less than 10% of calories does decrease your risk of cardiovascular disease. So it's prudent, and it's what I always recommended with my patients and clients, that fat-free, low-fat dairy certainly is part of a healthy eating pattern. Full-fat dairy can be a part of a healthy eating pattern as well, as long as you're still maintaining those guidelines of less than 10% saturated fat throughout the day or perhaps a week. Other factors that we've looked at for cancer risk. So a lot of people talk about estrogen. There's estrogen in milk. Well, the amount in milk is very small compared to the amount that we actually produce by our bodies. Current research showed no association between total dairy intake or even individual dairy products with estrogen positive breast cancer risk. And dairy consumption has not been associated with all-cause mortality, breast cancer mortality, or breast cancer recurrence in cancer survivors. We know with inflammation that chronic systemic inflammation does promote the development of cancers. But as we stated previously, there isn't any research that is supporting that claim that dairy is inflammatory. And some studies showed it might actually be anti-inflammatory. So again, I think the number one factor with cancer risk is this insulin-like growth factor, which is called IGF-1. It can be a possible cancer-promoting identity because of it stimulates cell growth and reproduction, while at the same time it inhibits self-destruction of some abnormal cells. So then some mutations can occur, which can then lead to cancer. In a very large study in the United Kingdom, the circulating levels among participants were associated with an increased risk of several cancers. It's important, though, that you do have adequate IGF-1 levels because they help maintain and actually rebuild muscle. The studies were showing that even though you have this increased intake of dairy products, and maybe perhaps it increases the levels of this IGF-1, and it can be statistically significant differences, the association of this moderate intake as compared to the broad range of what is considered a normal range of IGF doesn't mean that it's clinically significant. And that's kind of a hard concept to understand, I think, because if we say something statistically significant, aren't we saying that makes a difference? Here we're saying, yes, it's statistically significant, but we haven't seen that that is clinically meaningful because it's still kept the IGF within a normal range. IGF levels also are higher in someone who has just a high protein intake, and it could be from any source. They could be getting protein from plants, or they could be getting them from animals. So much more research is really needed to determine what is clinically significant and how much someone needs to take in for there to be a clinically significant factor that comes out of this. So let's move on to looking at these conclusions from the Dietary Guidelines Committee and their analysis of the evidence. So I think we have another poll. What are your reasons or concerns for choosing a plant-based milk? Greg, can you put that poll up?
The poll is up and running. Give it a second for it to start filtering, and there we go. People are starting, and it's 100% health concerns.
100% health concerns. Wow.
I'm sure that'll change a little bit.
Okay, well, let's keep looking at what the advisory committee looked at. They thought cost might be something. Most of the time, plant-based milks are more expensive than dairy milks, but sometimes a specialty milk, such as a lactose-free, maybe it's organic, any other kind of specialty milk, may actually double the cost of regular milk, and therefore it's more than the plant-based milk. Plant-based milk may cost less when you're comparing it to some of those specialty milks. Environmental sustainability. Farmers are testing new technology to reduce methane production by changing their feeding practices. Of course, methane production has been shown to contribute to global warming. And at this time, it's still higher for dairy milk than any plant-based milk. But some plant-based milks also affect the environment, such as with almond milk, which is very water intensive in terms of its production. There can be personal, family, and cultural preferences, health concerns. Yes, it looks like that was our number one, a milk allergy, low lactose intolerance. Someone who has kidney disease may have a need for a lower protein intake. And so one of those plant-based milks might be their best choice, or even a specific mineral that you want. And I guess no one put taste. I don't see taste in the chat. So, but it may be just taste. Some people don't like the taste of dairy milk. So perhaps oat milk or almond milk is better for you. Let's go through. So could other plant-based milks be used in a healthy dietary pattern instead of milk and soy milk? So with the dietary guidelines, foods are placed into food groups, and then they are suggesting the number of servings from each of the food groups. The one that dairy is in is called dairy and fortified soy alternatives. And this fortification is what's important. If it's just soy milk that has not been fortified, it would not be included in this group. When soy products are fortified, their nutritional content is very similar to dairy. But there's a varying degree of nutrient content in the different types of plant-based milks, and it even varies within a brand and within products. So the summary of their conclusions was that the direct substitution of a plant-based milk alternative for cow's milk within these healthy eating patterns may introduce unintended consequences for meeting other nutrient recommendations. Using plant-based milks in a healthy pattern requires meaningful guidance on how to select these milks, which are not nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. So meaningful guidance needs to be given on how to obtain these nutrients that are not being provided by the substitution of the plant-based milks that you might normally get in a dairy product. So let's look at those differences. So if we're saying that dairy milk is the gold standard, what are the important nutrients that it's contributing? Well, there's a lot, as you can see. It's protein, calcium, vitamin D, vitamin A, potassium, phosphorus, riboflavin, B12, choline, and zinc. The advisory committee identifies calcium, vitamin D, and potassium as nutrients of a public health concern, and it is across all age groups, except in infancy when they're usually getting breast milk, which would contain everything pretty much a baby needs, or they're getting a formula, which has been formalized and of course has been fortified with everything a baby needs. So the FDA has requested that the content of these three things be listed on those nutrition facts labels. Other nutrients like choline are nutrients that can pose a public health challenge. So it means we're not always meeting what we feel like are the amounts we should get on a daily basis. We don't see perhaps deficiencies yet, but there are challenges in some perhaps age groups. For older adults, protein and B12 are added as public health challenges. And then there are nutrients that pose public health concerns because they are in excess. And those are the added sugars. And remember, it's added sugars, not naturally occurring sugars, as well as saturated fats. So what about the nutrient content of plant-based milk? Well, most of the time, they are very similar to dairy milk in calcium and vitamin D, and that is because of fortification. But let's look at some of the other nutrients. So one is protein, and with the exception of soy, most plant-based milks don't contain protein to much of a degree, more than a couple of grams. So those who are vegan or vegetarian or for other reasons just limit meat, fish, poultry products, we've got to look at other ways for them to meet their protein needs. Calcium, again, is usually fortified, and thus often higher in cow's milk even. The plant-based milks will often have a higher calcium content than cow's milk. It's sort of interesting. But without that fortification, they are much lower. And this is especially important if you're giving plant-based milks to children that, during peak bone mass, we really need to make sure you're meeting calcium needs. In postmenopausal women, we also need to make sure you're meeting calcium needs. I used to have patients tell me, well, I eat a lot of dark green leafy vegetables. Well, unfortunately, that is just not going to meet your needs, as the calcium in these dark green leafy vegetables, about 50% of it is hooked up with oxalate. So it's a calcium oxalate that the body does not break those two apart, and thus the calcium is not absorbable. Excuse me, need to get a drink. Okay, so vitamin D, again, most of these plant-based milks are fortified, and they're going to contain the same amount as dairy milk, but some don't, and we're going to look at some of those today. And it's especially important for those who avoid sun exposure. If you go out and you always have sunscreen on, then your body is not able to synthesize vitamin D in the skin. Those who have darker skin also don't synthesize vitamin D at the same rate that those with lighter colored skin do. Another group that I think it's always important to remember for vitamin D are those who are living in group homes or in assisted living situations in which they may not get outside very much. And then with B12, it's only found in animals. So again, those who are vegan or vegetarian, you've got to make sure you include foods fortified with B12 or take the supplements. If you use any stomach secretion, if you have, extra hydrochloric acid in your stomach, and so you've got reflux badly, you take these meds to try to decrease the hydrochloric acid. Well, hydrochloric acid is required to absorb B12 that's naturally occurring in food. And you can absorb B12 from fortified foods sometimes better than naturally occurring sources, or even with a supplement. Then we go to these others, the potassium, the vitamin A, phosphorus, riboflavin, choline, and zinc. This varies greatly among the plant-based milks, and it is all going to be based through what they have added through fortification. So if one of these is of importance to you, then that would be something you'd want to look at on the label. And I think in some cases it may mean that you have to actually call the company to find out what the amount might be, because I found some of the labels didn't include some of these, which may mean that it's not in there. And then there's iodine. Dairy is the primary source of iodine now, many of it due to the farming practice and because it's in the feed. Salt used to be, but commercial foods are now using non-iodized salt. So if you buy a can of green beans or pinto beans or any other commercial product that's got salt added to it, it probably is non-iodized salt. Many people are using these gourmet salts now, such as Himalayan salt, and these salts also don't have any iodine in them. And then just many people have just decreased their use of added salt in cooking and at the table. Those who don't consume any fish or eggs or dairy products should choose a plant-based milk that's actually fortified with iodine to prevent goiter, or use added salt in your cooking. Interestingly, as I looked at this information and what the guidelines were saying kind of to do, I thought, I don't know any milks that are actually fortified with iodine. So, I just Googled what plant-based milks are fortified with iodine. And of course, our friend AI was the first to respond to me. And there's one called Alpro that I emailed the company, because when I went online, I couldn't find one of their milks. I couldn't find a label that had iodine listed. And they did email me back. They sent me a few links to their milks, but they're not even available in the United States. So that one was out. And there was another one called ASDA, which is actually a store in Britain. I couldn't find anything on their website either, but they're not in the United States anyway. So I'm really not sure in terms of iodine, which brands add or fortify their plant-based milks with iodine. And then what about these nutrients of concern, such as added sugars? Well, many of the plant-based milks you're going to see have added sugars, and I'm sure it's because of the taste, to improve the taste, but also if it's going to partake of flavor. There's vanilla flavors, there's chocolate flavors. It often can be up to 15 grams or more of added sugars. So the USDA suggests less than 10% of our calories to come from sugar in a day, which is about 50 grams of a 2,000 calorie diet. Where the Heart Association says, particularly people who have documented cardiovascular disease, it's about 25 grams for women that's recommended, or 37 grams for men. So if you want to not have those added sugars coming from a beverage that you're drinking, this plant-based milk, then make sure you choose one that doesn't have any added sugar, or just let it be part of the added sugar that is suggested in your overall consumption of added sugars in a day. The next thing is on emulsifiers. And these, of course, are going to be added for stabilization and things that make it a more creamy, the milk a more creamy texture. Some lab studies, remember lab studies mean it included rats or mice, and it showed some emulsifiers that cause changes in the gut microbiota that may show potential to promote some low-grade inflammation. We know low-grade inflammation can lead to cancer, just to name one thing. But observational studies showed some associations of a high intake of ultra-processed foods that contain emulsifiers with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease and then possibly some cancers. But people who have a high intake of ultra-processed foods often have just an overall poor diet quality. And since this was an observational study, we really don't know if it was the emulsifiers in those processed foods that was the problem, or was it just the fact that their overall diet was not a very good quality. So I think you can choose to avoid those with, excuse me, emulsifiers, or you can just consider them as part of an overall healthy diet. Some of the labels I have for you today will be able to see that there are some emulsifiers listed on the label. So let's just go through this now. Let's look at how can we analyze a plant-based milk to see if it's going to meet our needs or not, and which one is better. But I think the big elephant in the room maybe is soy milk healthy, because soy milk has come out too with some of the same fears of drinking it as there are for dairy milk. But the cancer-related fears are really unfounded. Isoflavones that are often called phytoestrogens are really not estrogen, and they don't pose estrogen-related risk. There was no human trial, and these were randomized controlled trials, which can show a direct relationship, did not show any relationship with breast cancer, that there was an increased risk for breast cancer. And some of the lab studies showed that, soy foods are actually anti-inflammatory. They contain antioxidants. And the isoflavones, which are the phytoestrogens, actually are metabolized to be other components. So they're not really in the body circulating as estrogens. For cancer survivors, it's felt soy can be included as part of a healthy diet. After a breast cancer diagnosis, a couple of servings a day, AICR says, is still a healthy choice. And even with Asian populations, who I think probably have the greatest intake of soy products, 3 servings a day was not linked to an increased risk for breast cancer. And I think we all know that soy milk is heart healthy too. The fat in soy milk is actually unsaturated, not saturated. And the health claim for soy milk and soy products in general, this has been, 20 years maybe, that diets with a total of 25 grams of soy protein per day as part of a diet that's low in saturated fat and cholesterol. Now that phrase in between those two commas is what's most important. It's got to be part of a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol, and it may reduce the risk of heart disease. And this is because of the claims, and we have seen the research that shows us it does reduce LDL cholesterol. But most people don't consume the 25 grams needed that is needed to see this type of lowering. So soy milk can be used in a plant-based pattern. It may help reduce LDL cholesterol, but mainly that's going to happen when it is replacing less healthy, higher saturated fat foods. So let's do a comparison. I thought Borden's was kind of a national brand, so that might be something some of you maybe use. And I just compared Borden's whole milk to Silk dairy-free protein original soy milk. And I'll tell you that the labels I'm using today were really, I based choosing these on the fact that I could choose them and they could go on these slides and be readable. Sometimes if I had to increase the size of a label or decrease the size of a label, the labels become illegible. So again, I'm not throwing any company under the bus or promoting a company. So with Borden's, when you're, or any label, when you always want to compare serving size. So these servings are both for 1 cup. The calories, 160 for whole milk, 110 for the soy milk. I don't think we see that as unusual because the fats are very different. 8 grams of fat in the whole milk, whereas 4.5 grams in the soy milk with much less saturated fat. Cholesterol 0 in the soy milk. The sodium is a little bit more in the whole milk versus soy, but not a big difference. There's a little bit of difference in total carbohydrate, but I want you to look at the sugars. 12 grams of carbohydrate in whole milk, 11 grams sugars. Those are naturally occurring sugars. There is no added sugar to the whole milk. This is the lactose. Those sugars accounted for are the lactose in the milk. With the soy milk, there's 9 grams of total carbohydrate, 2 grams of fiber, which is great. There's no fiber in regular milk, but 5 grams of sugar is added. So again, if you're watching your added sugar intake, this would be something you'd want to look out for. Then look at the nutritional composition, and you can see now why they let soy milk that's been fortified be in the same group with whole milk, because it's very, very similar. If you look at calcium, it's even higher in the soy milk than it is in the whole milk. Vitamin D is a little bit higher in the soy milk, but overall, they're very equal in nutrition components. So I think that there's 2 questions that we can ask when we're looking at the healthiness of these plant-based milks and what's best for us. So the first question, I think, is a very broad one. You know, what are the healthiest plant-based milks? And I think that's too broad of a question to actually answer. And the second question is, which plant-based milk is best to meet your overall diet nutrient needs? And I think that is the best question. So I think we have another poll on what nutrients are you most concerned about when you're choosing your plant-based milks. I'm not able to see the poll.
Yep, it is up and running, and we are filtering back and forth. Right now, it's 75% calcium and vitamin D. It's dropped back down to 50, tied with protein. So we'll see some jockeying here for a little bit. It looks like protein is the #1 choice, going back and forth with, like I said, calcium and vitamin D, and then vitamin B12, other, and potassium, vitamin A. That list is a distant 3rd, 4th, 5th. So Sharon, I would say, based off, I can't see the number of individuals who have submitted, but 52% now say calcium and vitamin D.
Calcium and vitamin D. I think that's terrific. And I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that that's it. So what factors should influence the choice? Well, again, let's look at what nutrients are different in plant-based milk. Just as a reminder, the protein, the calcium, and vitamin D, which are your top choices. Then there's B12, of course, and of course these other nutrients, vitamin A, potassium, etc., and then sugar and fat content. Well, of course, the nutrient content of a plant-based milk is going to vary depending on the plant source itself, particularly when it hasn't been fortified. Then, of course, it's going to depend on any added ingredients and fortification, and then just how it was processed. So plant sources of plant-based milks include grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, and then often a mixture of the two. I was at the grocery store and kind of passed by that part of the coolers where all the plant-based milks were, and it caught my eye that there were mixtures. There was a coconut plus almond milk. There was an oat plus almond milk. So I'm not really sure why they do that. I don't think that, maybe it's taste. I don't think it's nutrient content, because they still would need to have some fortification there. So here we go. Let's compare. Remember I said even within a company, within a brand, you may see differences. I choose Chobani because the labels were clear, easy to read, and I could get 4 of them on a slide where we could really look at the differences in these. So we've got Chobani original oat milk, a vanilla oat milk, extra creamy, and then a 0 sugar unsweetened oat milk. So you see the calories go anywhere from 110, 120, 140, and then down to 50. Fat is at 5, 8 grams for the creamy one, which doesn't surprise me, a little extra fat to make it creamy. And then only 2 grams in the 0 sugar one. Now, I don't understand exactly why they took out the sugar, why the fat went down. Again, that's a production change, I would assume. Cholesterol, 0 in all of them. Sodium is 105, except for the last one, the sugar-free one. It went down to 50. Carbohydrate was basically the same until, of course, the sugar-free version. And then, added sugar. So here's some where we have some added sugars, 7 to 9 grams in those first 3. And then, of course, no added sugar in the unsweetened one. And then protein went down 1 gram in the unsweetened one, where it was 2 grams of protein in the other 3. It's interesting to look at the added fortified nutrients for these. Vitamin D is about the same, a little bit higher in the 0 sugar one. Calcium is more than twice the amount in a sugar-free one. Potassium is less in the sugar-free one, the same in the other 3. Vitamin A is more in the sugar-free one. They're all about the same, 90 or 10% or so of needs in the other 3. So it's interesting. I don't know why the 0 sugar one has so many differences in their fortification. Let's compare the original Chobani oat milk with another brand, which is the Pacific brand, sorry. They have a barista series, and then they have their original milk. Calorie-wise, and again, serving size is all a cup here for these. Calorie-wise, it's the same for the original, the Chobani, as well as the Pacific original. Goes up a bit in the barista series, most likely due to the fat content, which is the least in the original oat milk, highest in the barista series. And then if you look down, sodium is a little bit less in that Pacific brand original one as well. There is a little bit of fiber in the barista one, which is kind of interesting. There is 7 grams of added sugar in the Chobani one, 3 in the Barista series, 4 in the original by Pacific. I think to look at the nutritional content, vitamin D isn't even listed under the Barista series. So those of you who said calcium and vitamin D were important, you can see calcium is less and vitamin D is non-existent in this Barista series. Vitamin D is about the same in the original one. Calcium is about the same. Potassium is a lot more in the Chobani version than it is in the Pacific version. So here's a very good example of being able, if you want it to be calcium and vitamin D, you might choose that Pacific brand for the being a little bit more in both of those nutrients. Let's look at pea milk. I don't know how many of you actually do pea milk, but I thought I wanted to do some other ones that maybe you weren't as familiar with. So with these, we're still looking at 1 cup servings, calories similar at 60 and 80. The fats are similar. Sodium is a little bit more in the Ripple brand. Protein is double in the Ripple brand of pea milk. I think looking at the nutrients, though, vitamin D is a lot more in these than it is any of the others. Calcium is more in Ripple. Potassium is very high in the Sprout version of pea milk. And then they both have some B12 listed. It's a little bit more in the Ripple brand. So again, you're looking at which one, what's most important to me. And I thought it was very interesting with the pea milk that they had so much vitamin D added to them, and were also still very good sources of calcium. And let's look at almond milk. So we've got Almond Breeze unsweetened original almond milk, and we have one called Califia Farms, which has gotten popular. I'm in Texas, and it's gotten popular in the Texas area. So the fats higher in the Califia Farms. Calories are double. It's probably that fat intake right there. Again, we are comparing 8-ounce portions. If you go down, carbohydrates still low. There's no added sugars, but look at the difference in the added fortified nutrients. Vitamin D is 0 in Califia. It's only 20 milligrams of calcium. So if you are one of these 50% that chose the calcium and vitamin D, this might not be the brand you want to choose, or you use it maybe in cooking and not something that you drink. Whereas the Almond Breeze is much higher in all of these other nutrients. And now let's compare the Almond Breeze Original with Silk Original. You can see calories are the same, exactly. Fats the same, no cholesterol, sodium's roughly the same, carbohydrate is the same. Again, we look down and it's really the differences in vitamin D content. Calcium is actually the same. This is where it becomes a little bit more different. So this one is a lot more vitamin D in it than the Silk does. The Almond Breeze has more than the Silk does, but they both have 7 grams of added sugars. So again, if you're looking at added sugars as an issue for you, these are equal in that. So maybe if calcium is your next thing, they're equal. If now it's vitamin D, then it may be you choose the Almond Breeze over the Silk. So let's look at coconut milk. I know this is often a very controversial a controversial choice, or even people want to think it's healthy. You see it out in the media, people adding coconut milk to their coffee even. So I want to show here this difference between these two, in that first of all, this Thai kitchen unsweetened coconut milk is probably used more in cooking than it is as something someone will drink. And that a third of a cup is the portion size listed. So we're not comparing apples to apples here, because the other 365 Whole Foods unsweetened original coconut milk is an 8-ounce serving, but you can see the calories are very different, 120 versus 50. But if we made this be a cup of the Thai kitchen one, that'd be 360 calories versus 50 calories. And it's all has to do with fat and saturated fat. And I will tell you that saturated fat does raise cholesterol levels. Regardless of what you might have read in media or in social media or Instagram, any of those places, it is a type of saturated fat that will raise your cholesterol level. The important thing in comparing these two in particular is, look, it's just 0 for these fortifications of nutrients. There's no vitamin A, there's no calcium, there's no vitamin C, whereas the other one does have a good bit of vitamin A, and it's got some calcium. It's not as high as other plant-based milks, but it does have 140 milligrams. Also has some B12 in that. So if we look at another brand called Vita Coco and a brand called So Delicious, you can see they're a little bit closer. The calories are pretty much the same. It's a little bit more fat in the So Delicious and more saturated fat in particular in that one. There's no added sugars in the Vita Coco one, where there are 7 grams of added sugar in the So Delicious. There's no vitamin D in the Vita Coco, where there is some in the So Delicious. Calcium is very low in this Vita Coco, or calcium is a little bit higher. It's 130 milligrams. Remember, we've seen it be 400 milligrams in some other products. So again, it's reading these labels, it's putting them next to each other and comparing and looking at the things that you're most interested in, which it seems from this group, it's the protein, where here coconut milk doesn't have any protein, along with the calcium and vitamin D. And then let's look at hemp milk. Now, this was the only brand of hemp milk that I could find some labels for. And here I want you to see the xanthan gum. That is an emulsifier that is used in this particular milk. So it's just the Pacific brand. One of them is hemp original, one's the unsweetened one. So of course that one has fewer calories. Fat's about the same, sodium is similar. Look at the difference in carbohydrate. The hemp original milk has 13 grams of added sugars. That is a lot. So that's almost a tablespoon of sugar. It's also got a little more protein. I don't know if that balances out having all that added sugars or not. It wouldn't for me, but it might be for other people. Vitamin D is less in the hemp original than it is the unsweetened version. Calcium is a little bit less as well. It's got some magnesium, it's got some potassium. Don't believe it's quite as high as in the others. So in this one, I think the added sugar of the original one is the thing that to me stands out the most. So to kind of summarize the talk for today, I think we've gone through our objectives and we've looked at the research on health risk with dairy products with cancer and cardiovascular disease. We're going to relook at those conclusions of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. I think we've shown the differences between dairy and plant-based milks, the different varieties of plant-based milks, and we've really zoned in on how to analyze a plant-based milk to best meet an individual's nutritional needs. So just to review again the conclusions of the advisory committee, this is just an excerpt of their conclusions, but I also think it's just a great summary of what this talk was for today, that the direct substitution of plant-based milk alternatives for cow's milk within a healthy eating pattern may introduce unintended consequences for meeting other nutrient recommendations, and it may vary by product selected. Therefore, including plant-based milks as part of a healthy dietary pattern requires some meaningful guidance and thought process, I think, on how to select a plant-based milk, especially when they are not nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk and exhibit variability in nutrient content across the products. I want to thank my dear friend and colleague, Karen Collins. She and I are on a task force together for a nutrition questionnaire that we developed for cardiac rehab programs. And we needed to do some big deep dive into plant-based milks due to some questions the dietitians across the country using this questionnaire had. And so that's a lot where this research came from. And so I thank her for all of her work that she did for that. And if I really encourage you to visit her website, she's got lots of nutrition information on diet nutrition related to CVD and cancer. I've got some references here for you if you want to take a deeper dive into this. And then now I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I'm going to go back to the first reference slide. So if you have your pens and paper ready, go ahead and take a picture, write this down, whatever you want to do for these notes. Got a few questions and we'll get to them. Let's start off with the studies that you referenced. And somebody dropped this early in the presentation. Are any of these studies funded by Big Dairy?
Usually they are NIH funded. So I don't believe that any of those were funded by the dairy industry.
This person uses dairy milk for my kefir cultures. Would a plant-based milk also work for kefir? And I may be butchering it, Kefir.
Yeah, kefir. I don't know, but I would bet it would. And the reason I say that is I worked with someone who used to make those, and she did not drink dairy milk. And I tasted, she brought some of her stuff in and we tasted them. I don't know what type of milk she used, but I'm sure it was a plant-based milk because she did not drink dairy milk. She had a lactose intolerance.
Which is better to look at, sodium, total sugars?
In milk, sodium is not that high. When we think about sodium, we like to look at it as about 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day. If you have hypertension, start to ease back on that, get closer to 1,500. The DASH diets showed 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day had the greatest lowering. So between sodium and sugar and milk not containing that much, I would go for the sugar. I'd look at sugar over sodium.
And to go along with that, why is it more important to consider added sugars versus naturally occurring sugars?
Well, that's a really good question. The concept of naturally occurring sugars is that they are occurring in a product that has lots of other nutrients with it versus just sugar. And when you've just put sugar in, you haven't gotten any other nutrients. So the lactose that's in milk is accompanied by all these other nutrients versus adding having the added sugars in. You certainly can just account for it as part of total carbohydrate intake if you wanted to, or it's recommended that you account for it as part of your sugar intake.
What are the differences between milk types as far as how processed they are?
The plant-based milks are going to be more processed than a dairy milk is because of what they have to go through. Just like the almond milk, the way they've got to grind it up, they just have to totally change the product that it's coming from. It doesn't look like an almond when it's in the carton. So they've totally changed up that food product to get the milk. Same thing for oats. Doesn't look like oats. So I think there's more processing that's going to occur for plant-based milks than there is for dairy milk.
Why is soy milk getting hard to find in stores? Like it's just going out of style.
Really? I have not heard anyone say that they were having a hard time finding soy milk. So I don't know unless there has something to do with the soybean production in the United States or something has occurred. I don't know.
A couple more questions and we'll put a bow on this. If you develop lactose intolerance later in life, can you try to reintroduce dairy milk back into your diet, or should you forego dairy milk altogether?
Well, you can get lactose-free dairy milk. Also, many people have a limit. So it may be you could use some milk in cooking, but you can't drink a full glass of milk. But it's not unusual to become lactose intolerant as we age.
What about using a plant-based milk to mix with instant breakfast?
Oh, I think it's perfect. I've had patients do that. They use plant-based milk to add protein powders to it. There is no problem with doing that. It's a great way to use the plant-based milk, and it may be for many people. I know it said it made them like the plant-based milk better.
Awesome. This has been a fascinating presentation. I learned quite a bit. I'm a straight up old-fashioned milk kind of guy myself, so it's just interesting. Everybody's got their own thing. So thank you so much for enlightening us and being here today, Sharon.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
You are so very welcome. And a quick reminder for today's audience, this webinar was recorded when it's been uploaded onto our website. You'll get an email with the link. Meanwhile, we'd love for you to come back for the upcoming webinars you see on your screen. On August 7th, Dr. Parker Woodruff will return for The Signals We Send, Rethinking Leadership in an Age of Noise. Interested in franchising but don't know where to start? Join us August 19th for Pathways to Ownership, exploring franchising as a vehicle for wealth and legacy. On September 16th, our friends from the MPA board will be with us for Public Service and Pop Culture, learning about government and nonprofit from your favorite shows. And on September 25th, come back for Thriving in Your 20s, Essential Healthy Habits for Young Adults. Register for these and more at alumni.uab.edu/events. And as we close, let us know how we're doing. And if you have ideas for future webinar topics, that QR code on the screen is going to take you to a very short survey for you to share your feedback. Once again, thanks so much for joining us. And as always, go Blazers.